Good afternoon. Now let's do what we have to do first. In the event of a fire alarm sounds, please remain in the auditorium and stay seated. Should there be a need to evacuate, a Springmore staff member will direct you on how to leave in an orderly fashion. Please remember not to use the elevators, and please go to a red pole once outside. And if you have not already done so, please either silence or turn off your cell phones so that they will not interrupt the program once it begins. I would like to call this meeting of the Springmore Residents Association to order and welcome you to this second Residents Association meeting for 2025. Again, it's great to see all of you here in the auditorium, and I hope that we have a large number also watching on 1341. Remember that all Residents Association meetings are live streamed on 1341. Thanks again today to Carrie Ritchie, who's operating the camera. And a recording of these meetings will also be on the resident portal within 48 hours if you want to watch them in the future. And all the 2024 programs are also still on the resident portal. I would like at this time to ask if there are any new residents who are attending a Residents Association meeting for the very first time. If you are attending for the very first time, please raise your hand. Okay. If you're watching us on 1341 for the first time, we welcome you once again to the Residents Association. I would like now to call on our Executive Director, Brad Dilday, for comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is, I guess, my official first Residents Association meeting as the Executive Director. So thank you. Happy to be here with you all, and hopefully everything's going smooth. It's all good on my end, so hopefully good for you all. But no, I did just wanted to mention a couple of things just to kind of keep you all in the loop. Later this month, if you recall, we ordered new chillers that are going to be going on, one on the Creedmoor building and one on the Valley building at South Village. So those should be here hopefully the end of February, and then first part of March, we'll be getting those installed. So you'll have a crane occupying some space over there as they lift those big units up on top of the roof. And then we will be able to take some parts off of those old ones, put them onto the units over here at North Village so that we can be proactive and not have any heating or cooling issues this summer, right? That's the plan. That's what we're counting on. So we'll get that done. And then I also wanted to let you know the elevator out here, Elevator 4, we signed the paperwork to order that about 2 weeks ago now. So we will be replacing this elevator. That's about, they said it's a 16-week delay to get the parts and get everything here. So it'll be about 3 or 4 months before we get to actually put it in place. And then is 4 weeks downtime to install the new elevator. So that's going to be a while. It'll be we'll have some workarounds and make sure everything else is greased up and ready to take the extra traffic. But it'll be a great improvement once we get it in here, and we'll be a little bit more reliable as this is a heavily trafficked spot right here. So that's all I got. I hope you all enjoy the presentation. It sounds like it's going to be interesting. And if you ever need anything, you know where I am. Feel free to call me or just come by. So thank you all.
Thank you, Brad. It is now time for the program portion of the Residents Association meeting, so I recognize our Vice President, Barbara Smith.
Thank you all for being here today. And I am excited to introduce this young lady. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about, it's not on her bio, but when she was 13 years old, she won the hollering contest in Spivey's Corner. That's not on her bio. You'll have to give him a sample. Paula Brown Stafford is a biopharmaceutical executive and leading consultant with more than 35 years of industry experience. She is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Allucent, a drug development service provider for the biopharmaceutical industry. Allucent is helping bring new therapies to light. Ms. Stafford was previously the Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board at Novan, a biotechnology company, and the developer of an FDA-approved product, ZELSUVMI, which is a treatment for molluscum contagiosum. Prior to joining Novan, Ms. Stafford served as President of Clinical Development at Quintiles, now IQVIA, from 2010 to 2015, where she was responsible for global clinical development services, a multi-billion-dollar business unit. She joined Quintiles in 1985. Ms. Stafford is also co-founder and managing director of Habergeon LLC, a boutique consulting business and an adjunct professor in public health leadership for the Gilling School of Global Public Health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm a wolf packer. Anyway, Ms. Stafford is also co-author with Lisa T. Grimes of the best-selling book, Remember Who You Are, which was published in 2018. In 2014, Ms. Stafford provided expert testimony in a U.S. congressional hearing initiated by the U.S. Energy and Commerce Committee on the 21st Century Cures Initiative to modernize clinical trials. Ms. Stafford holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Public Health with a concentration in biostatistics from the Gilling School at UNC. In 2016, the university honored Ms. Stafford with a Distinguished Alumna Award. Ms. Stafford resides in Chatham County, and she is the daughter of Bert Brown, deceased, and moi, Barbara Brown Smith. She is the wife of attorney Greg Stafford for 33 years and the mother of 2 of my 12 grandchildren. Celia, who is working on her PhD at Harvard, and Jackson, who is a corporate attorney in Atlanta. I give you my daughter.
Well, good afternoon. I am delighted to be here. And I've been here many, many times because, as many of you know, my grandmother came here in 2000 and lived until she passed away in 2019. So I've been visiting Springmoor probably longer than most of you. So I'm very happy to be here. And based on my experience and what Mom and I talked about is I decided to share what I call the drug development journey and just share with you what I've learned about the process to bring a drug product. And that could be a drug or which is distinguished from a biologic, which is distinguished from even devices. But, I just call it the drug development journey. And I'm sure you'll have some questions, and I will take those at the end, but I'm going to try to anticipate some along the way. So what I wanted to cover first, a little bit just about who are the top pharmaceutical companies in the world, and give you kind of 2 perspectives on that. And then talk about the life cycle from the discovery of a potential product or drug until it is commercialized, and that means you can buy it or your doctor can prescribe it. I'm going to give you 2 examples of that life cycle. I'm going to talk about metformin, which there may be many of you on metformin for diabetes, because my grandmother was, as is my mother. So, and I figure I'll be there someday. And then the newer drug, which my mom referenced, is ZELSUVMI, which is the generic name is berdazimer sodium. So I'll give you those 2 examples. And then I'll talk a little bit about the service providers to the pharmaceutical industry sort of after that, because that's the business that I've been in really of my now 39 years in the industry. 32 have been in the service provider, and then 7 of it have been with a biotechnology company. I say biopharmaceutical because it's kind of that combination of biotech companies, which are looking at large molecules, and pharmaceutical companies, which are looking at small molecules. And then just talking about, end up with some of the new or the latest trends in what's happening in the pharmaceutical industry, some of what you hear in the news. And I can speak to a little bit of that. And this is all really my personal opinion, rather than, even though Lucent is the company I work for, I'm providing really my personal learnings and experience with you today. Does that sound like a deal? All right. Well, I realized that I gave Mom a copy of one of the slides that I'm going to use, and I realized afterwards there are a lot of acronyms. And in our industry, we use a lot of acronyms. And so I thought I'd go through a couple of those up front that are on that sheet, and we're not going to get to that sheet for a little bit, but you hear a lot about the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. R&D really speaks to the research, which really gets to the point before that discovery. So, and then the development of the drug. So research and development. And then within pharmaceutical companies, they generally have an R&D group and they'll have a commercial group. And one is taking it from bench to approval. And then once a drug is approved and it can be on the market, then they call that the commercial. And apologies if I tell you things you know. I just don't know what anybody knows, so I'm just going to tell you, share information. So you'll see on the sheet there's reference to an IND. It's a very important process I'll talk about, and that stands for the investigational new drug. So that's the drug that's being investigated to try to get to an approval to get it to market. And then there's the new drug application, which is an NDA, which is what is submitted to the FDA to get them to approve or not a new product to be launched and commercialized. And this is in the US, obviously. So FDA in Europe, it's the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. And then Canada has MHRA, and there's just, or UK is MHRA. And then Japan and China have their own. So anyway. PK is pharmacokinetics, which is really what the drug does to the body, and pharmacodynamics is how the body responds to a drug. And ADME is on the sheet in front of you, and that's the different studies that have to be done very early on. Really, these are the pharmacokinetic studies, which are how is the drug absorbed in the body? How is it distributed in the body? How is it metabolized in the body? And how is it excreted from the body? So that's the pharmacokinetics. And you have to do different studies in all of these before, generally, most of those before you even get into humans. And then PMS is the post-marketing surveillance. And really that is once a drug is approved, to continue to study the drug and to ensure that it's doing what you expected it to do in the general population. And then at the same time, once a product is on the market, and sometimes before, but anyway, the RWE or RWD, which is real world evidence and real world data. And so that again is looking more at epidemiological data when a product is on the market, how how many people are using it and how it's being prescribed and what are the responses to that. So I'll get into more, and if I do need to talk slower, I will. For a Southerner, I kind of talk fast sometimes. But those are just some of the terms on that sheet and some that I might say, and I'll try to be conscious when I use an acronym, maybe other than the FDA and the NDA and the IND, because those are the three big ones that you probably need to think about, is the agency that's going to approve the product. An IND is what the FDA reviews to say, yes, this can go into humans. And then the NDA, which is the process to get a drug approved before it can be distributed, widely commercialized. We talk about market launch, so it's launched and commercialized. Okay. So let me take a step back a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but really just to share, there's different ways to look at the who are the top, and I'm going to show you two different ways. So this is based on actually 2024 data. The next slide is based on 2023 because I haven't produced this one yet. It's still early in 2025. But looking at the revenue, and you can imagine the top 10 in the world, why is Pfizer number one? And mainly because they had the vaccine for COVID. And those, monies continued. But they've been one of the largest for a long time. They've been in the top 5 as long as I can remember. So Pfizer, J&J or Johnson & Johnson, they have, through the years, and they recently this year announced a very large acquisition because they're always jockeying for position. And they're looking at their portfolio of products, and they look at when the patent life is going to end, because the patent life is generally, 20 years. They'll get different extensions for pediatric use or, other reasons. They might get some sort of an extension, but usually a patent life is about 20 years that they're going to get, and usually you're going to find out on that sheet, it's going to take generally at least 10 years to get to market. So that's 10 years, usually, of their patent that's gone during the research and development phase. And so then they really only have 10 years to make their money back. Other ones, AbbVie, Merck, you can see Roche, Sanofi, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Bristol Myers Squibb, GSK. GSK had their headquarters in Durham Research Triangle Park for many, many years. Their headquarters is now in Philadelphia. Novartis produces a lot of their products. You may read about them. They have some facilities here, as well as Merck does, and here in North Carolina, kind of in this area. So that's just, so those are ranked on the revenue from the products, so what they sell them for. And a lot of the monies don't go to the pharma companies, and I can talk all day long about that. Many of these topics I could spend an hour on, so I will come back to some of them if we have time. But just to give you a feel, you've probably seen some of these names on medications that you may take, and just thought I'd share that. And then the other way to look at it is from an investment standpoint. You may invest in these companies, and this is based on their market cap as of the end of 2023. I haven't been able to find this same chart from 2024 yet, but Lilly doesn't make the most revenue, but their market cap is high because of what may be coming to the market. So when you look at the patent life of their products, and obviously, or not obviously, but if the obesity drugs that people are talking about, people that are using them maybe started out with diabetes, but then they've become weight loss drugs to a degree. Lilly has one of them, and the other one's with Novo Nordisk. So that's what's kind of pushing up. But they also have a potential Alzheimer's product at Lilly, and again, a lot in the diabetes area, as well as some other therapeutic areas. J&J, they're second on the list in both of these charts. Yeah. Oh, sorry. These are the market cap is billions or millions of dollars. Yeah, sorry. Just to repeat, because I know that people watching this from your home can't hear the question. So it was, what do these represent? And I apologize for that, but I think these are billions of dollars. And so you can see that the bottom, Novo Nordisk, I mentioned, is number 3. They're a Danish company, and they have the other diabetes, obesity drug. And then at the bottom, you can see is Pfizer. So Pfizer, is investing now in their future products to come out because they see over the next little while that they have a lot of products coming off of patent, so they won't be making as much, if you will. So you have to really follow their drug development, and that's just more from an investment standpoint, knowing which pharmaceutical company you want to invest in, looking at their pipeline of products and when they might get one approved. That's just some background there. Okay, so here's what you have in your lap. I just thought there was, if I was going to pick one slide that I might spend the most amount of time on, and I do want to keep my watch and monitor that, is what I call the drug development process. So it is from discovery to commercialization, and I call this a chevron. So kind of the 3 areas is that discovery that I mentioned, which is preclinical. So clinic, meaning when it goes into the clinic, when it goes into humans, that's the clinical, which is the middle one. And then the post-approval, so once it's approved. Let me get my little handy dandy. I don't know if you can see this at home, but I'm going to use this and try to do this here from the side. Oh, sorry. So this is what I mentioned about the IND. So when you're looking at the discovery of a potential product, so they call it a target. They call this product, and they call them product candidates until they are approved, because they're not technically a product until they're approved. So they'll call it a product candidate, or they'll call it a target. And a lot of times, scientists will discover what might be a product, but they don't actually know what it would be good for. And so some of it is trying to target what they're going to use that product for. Some may know Viagra was not originally for erectile dysfunction. It was originally for heart disease. So, what products end up being prescribed for may not be its original thought. And anyway, so you identify what you think this target product candidate is. In vitro, the way I always remember that is the T, so it's tube. So it's in the tube. It's in the in the lab where you have the Petri dish and whatever, and you're testing to see what this may accomplish. Let's say that. And then in vivo, so after you've gone from the tubes, before you can go in the middle here, you basically have to test it in animals, which I know for some that's very unfortunate, but we wouldn't be here as long as we are if, in my opinion, if they didn't try it in animals first. And so usually the first is mice. Sometimes it can be primates, being some sort of monkey, some dogs, usually beagles. And it just depends on what you're treating. And also pigs are often used because of their skin. Their thick skin is more like human skin than a lot. And so a lot of the topical agents would be treated on pigs. So those are generally in vivo. Now, not every drug is treated in all 4 of those animal species, but the FDA wants to see multiple and not just mice, for instance. And then that PK and PD that I mentioned, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, is looking to determine what's going to happen in the body. And some of that, and then it gets split between really here in the sort of preclinical area to then the ADME, which was that absorption, distribution, and excretion, metabolism, and excretion. But anyway, those are all trying to understand what it's going to do to the body. Then, once you think you have enough information that you understand more about the mechanism of a drug. There are a lot of drugs on the market that we don't know completely the mechanism of action, the MOA. We don't completely know, but we know it works. And so you get as much information, and then you put together a package of data. And that data goes into this IND, the Investigational New Drug application. And that goes to the FDA. And so these stars are the big pieces. One is to get into humans, and then one is to get it approved and to be marketed. So the IND is a critical phase of submitting a package of data to the FDA and then having a meeting with the FDA. And most always they have questions and they tell you to go back and do another study or do another something. When you submit that package to the FDA, the IND, you tell them what you think you're using this for, what therapeutic area, meaning is it for diabetes? And are you treating type 1 or type 2? And they do want to know what's on the market already, because you pretty much have to show that you're going to be as good as anything on the market or better than. If you're not as good as something already on the market, why would we want to take it, right? So the FDA wants you to show them that this is going to be better than anything that's already out there. So you have to have that in your plan that you show the FDA. So once they approve your IND, once you, like I have a client right now who has an IND with the agency, and because they've already had a pre-meeting, et cetera, the FDA, if they don't respond within 30 days, you can go ahead and start your study in the middle there, and it's called phase 1. And phase 1, you call it either HV, healthy volunteers, or FIV, first, or FIH, first in humans, or first, and for a long time it was first in man, but we say first in humans. And so, you know, you do one small study because you do want to check, you know, maybe the mice didn't die, but we don't want us to die, right? So you try to make sure that you have a small. So usually the first study is going to be in about 12 patients, or not patient, we don't call them patients because they are healthy. They won't have diabetes because the first time you try it in humans, you're just trying to make sure that it's safe for somebody that is healthy. So let's make sure that it's safe in a very small, and these are what we call in-bed units, and they have to be connected to a hospital, or they have to have some sort of emergency care, because they want to make sure that, you know, God, you know, be with us, that nothing happens, but if something were to happen, that you were in a situation that they could take care in an emergent situation. So you'll have, you know, a minimum of one phase 1 study, but usually you'll have at least 2. So one would be in the healthy volunteers, and then if that goes well and it's safe, then you would do a smaller study, maybe 24 patients. I've seen as many as 48, 24 to 48 patients in, and those would be patients, not volunteers, patients meaning they have the disease. So again, let's use diabetes. You would have a study of 24 to 48 people with diabetes, take the new drug. Now you see is it safe, again, in a diabetes patient, but secondly, is it efficacious? Meaning, is there efficacy? Does it treat the disease that you're aiming to treat? Now, if all of those go well, then you can go straight into a phase 2 study. In phase 2, you're determining the dose of the drug. Is it 5 milligrams? Is it 10 milligrams? Is it 50 milligrams? And usually you do what you call a dose ranging study. And you want the maximum dose to get the efficacy without impacting safety. And so usually you do what they call a dose escalation. So these, again, are all volunteers who come into the study and might have diabetes, haven't been on a study before, or at least in the last few months. Usually it's 90 days that they wash out from a previous drug that you might be on. Because to go into a clinical trial, you usually have to be clean from having any other drugs in your system. And so phase 2 is looking at that dose, and you can start at 5 milligrams, and if you tolerate that, then they might give you 10 milligrams. If you tolerate that, then they might give you 25 milligrams, et cetera. So they design all these studies around getting the most efficient dose to get to work for the indication, the therapeutic area that you have, but also to be safe. So once they decide if that study runs well and you can prove efficacy and safety, then you go into a much larger, so phase 3. So if you think back, so the much larger study is because obviously before we are going to market this product, we need to make sure that it works in more than 48 patients. And then this is where the statistics really comes in, and that's my background, but looking at how many patients are going to show you the proof, basically. You have a hypothesis, and you hypothesize that this drug is better than another drug, or this drug is better than a placebo. So you hypothesize, and you determine a sample size. And that sample size, I'm running in our company phase 3 trials right now, which are anywhere from, in an oncology product, it might be just 100 patients. But in a cardiovascular large study, it might be 20,000 patients. And those are the numbers you heard with COVID, where, thousands of patients in those phase 3 trials to get the COVID-19 products on the market. As you see here, so usually the FDA wants you to have 2 randomized and controlled, they say, 2 phase 3 studies. Because the FDA feels that if you just do 1, there could be a bias and error. You've got to run 2 and to show similar results in the 2 studies to really prove that this product works. But there are exceptions to these. With rare diseases, some products have been approved after phase 2 based on 1 study. And so there are exceptions to the rule, but the rule of thumb is, 2 phase 1 studies, at least 1 phase 2, and 2 phase 3s, and all of these have to be possible. The thing is, anywhere in there, a drug can fail. And fail means that it either wasn't safe, or it didn't prove to be efficacious, or you couldn't figure out how to manufacture it in bulk, something of that line. But when you think about drug pricing and what you pay, you're paying for all of this to have happened. The rule of thumb again here is that only, I think they're now saying 3 out of 10 that get to phase 1 ever get approved. So there's a lot of research that happens behind the scenes that you never hear about of products that never get to the market. So once you've run your phase 3, and I will say you do meet with the FDA one more time at minimum. At the end of phase 2, you have a end of phase 2 meeting. It's a very specific meeting that the FDA says, before you go into phase 3, we want to talk to you again. Before you go into the potentially thousands of patients, we want to talk to you and make sure that you're doing things right, because we don't want, the FDA, we don't want you treating hundreds, maybe thousands of patients if we're not comfortable that you've proven, the steps prior. And I think it's a very good process, actually. So then you run your phase 3 studies. if they are successful, then you can submit the NDA. And that NDA, new drug application, you are applying for a new drug to be approved. And that process generally takes a year, just that. Once you submit it to the FDA, they have a year to review it. There are only a couple of exceptions. Again, for rare disease, they get 9 to 10 months, but not much off of that. And then the last chevron here is really what they call phase 4, and that's just around once you've submitted your product. If you're going to go out to a doctor, and I'll tell a story about my little granny here in a minute, if you're going to go out to a doctor and try to get them to prescribe this drug, you need to tell them a lot about it, and they want as much information as they can. So you can continue to collect information about this product and how patients utilize it in the real world. Maybe I won't go too much into that. So that second star, the NDA, if it is approved, then you can market and launch the product. But as you see at the bottom, the estimated costs to bring one product to market is roughly $1 billion to $2 billion. And, you know, all of these from that discovery and preclinical, anywhere from 10 to 100 million. And then that clinical research in the middle is what really costs. And it really depends on the disease and how many patients you need to treat in order to determine the efficacy and safety of the drug. So that's why the range is anywhere from 100 million to $1 billion. And then really this last phase, again, really wide range. Smaller companies would spend that 10 million, but the Pfizers, J&J, Novartis, they've got a lot of money, and they'll spend it on advertising to you during a Super Bowl commercial that you should be prescribed this product. And that's where, a lot of that money does go in trying to make you aware of the product in the marketplace. But they have to be very careful what they say. They have to share with you, and a lot of them get in trouble and pay fines because they don't tell you everything they should in these commercials. But generally, they are trustworthy, but you do have to be cautious of what they're advertising. So that's the drug development process. I probably bored you with that a little bit, but hopefully that was a little bit helpful, what goes into how long it takes. I mean, it takes years, 10 to 15 years. And that's why I talked about the patent life of 20. You spend a good 10 or more trying to determine if this product is going to, work or not. So it's a long process. So I thought this is where I'll give you an example. So metformin. The history here is that I've worked on both of these products in two different capacities. So with metformin, I was working at Quintiles, and we were running those phase 3 studies. So I was the project manager for conducting those phase 3 studies for metformin. Metformin is what they call a first-line treatment for type 2 diabetes. First line meaning you can try it first, and then you can add other things, like Granny went on insulin eventually. It was actually described, you can see here, 1922. It was actually described in the literature. It took them many years to begin the testing, and then in France in 1957, it was actually approved as a medication, but at that time, they approved it, but they didn't really know what they were using it for. So it was later in the 60s, somewhere around 1968 or so, that it was being prescribed and marketed for diabetes. Well, why did it take so long for it to get to the U.S.? Because you probably didn't hear about it in the U.S. until the 1990s. Well, there were some other glucose-lowering agents called biguanides, and they were discontinued in Europe because of lactic acidosis. And it is why the FDA didn't really want to approve metformin at first, because they said it's a cousin. It's similar to the biguanides. And we don't think that it's safe. And it was an uphill battle. I went to the FDA a couple of times. The last time was what they called an advisory committee meeting in 1994, and the FDA finally did approve it. Sorry, that little R is the registered trademark. It got moved somehow. Anyway, but the patent for this product expired in 2000, which is why it was marketed as Glucophage from 1995 to 2000. They only had 5 years of patent exclusivity life remaining on Glucophage when they got it to the market. And so it has gone back to its, what they call generic name, metformin. And so that's why you may have heard for a while about Glucophage, and now you hear about metformin. They're the same product. Although there was, through the years, there's an extended release now from what was approved. So from a timeline standpoint, as I told you, 1986, LIFA Pharmaceuticals. They're out of Lyon, France, but they had an office in New York and had 10 employees. But LIFA bought the rights to metformin in the U.S., and they're the ones who then, 1988 to 1992, ran those phase 3 studies. Because in Europe, they had enough data that they had already completed those phase 1 and those phase 2 studies, but the US FDA required these phase 3 studies, so they ran 2 big phase 3 studies, about 1,000 patients each, I think I recall. So those phase 3 studies. And then we went to the FDA, we submitted in 1993, and it took that year, and I put the NDA was defended. So not every product has to have an advisory committee meeting, but the FDA brings in, they actually ask an outside panel, not FDA, but an outside panel of experts to come and review your data and to make a recommendation. And you hear about this sometimes on the news. There was a Biogen drug for Alzheimer's, and the advisory committee basically said no, and then the FDA said yes, or vice versa, I'm forgetting. But I think it was the advisory committee said no, but then the FDA approved it anyway. So they don't have to agree, but they go out and get a panel. Not every drug requires it, but metformin did because of this concern. And we used a lot of data to prove them being the skeptics, wrong. And so in 1995, as I mentioned, Glucophage was available on the market. So this is my happy little granny. So I know, and this was this was her 90th birthday. So this was in 2009. But in 1995, her doctor came and said, we aren't able, with your diet, et cetera, we aren't able to manage your insulin. You're going to need, your own insulin levels or glucose levels. So they said, we want to put you on insulin. Well, I knew from running these studies, that once she went on insulin at that point, she probably would never get off of insulin. I felt that it was going to hurt her quality of life. So on a Sunday afternoon, Mom and Granny were at the house, and I called the CEO of LIFA, and I said, okay, I'm not a physician. Just be clear, I'm a biostatistician. I'm not a physician, so I'm not giving any, medical advice here. But that day I was. But I called the CEO and I said, these are the details of my grandmother, and I think she should be on metformin. What do you think? And she listened and she said, I agree with you. So we called my grandmother's doctor back, and he had said, oh, we don't want to put you on it. We don't know enough about it. And my grandmother thankfully told him, my daughter knows this drug, and you should go on metformin. And she did. And she lived a very happy, 24 more years, and even, riding a moped in Bermuda when she was 90. So, when people ask me why I do what I do, I tell this story. And it is why I do what I do. So, okay. The second journey for me, and I've been on many in between in various places, but the other one that was very, personal, I became the CEO of this company for Berdazimer Gel, 10.3%. The reason that is there is because it is a topical gel, and it was considered first in class because there's never been this class of drug on the market, and it is for molluscum contagiosum. And if you had children who had little white warts, and you might have called them water warts, that's molluscum, and it's highly contagious. Most of the kids get it at the pool or on a wrestling mat. We had a baseball team come in for a clinical trial together because they all got it from each other. So it's highly contagious. It's mostly in children, but it affects about 6 million people a year. But the product that was discovered at UNC Chapel Hill, not NC State, but at UNC Chapel Hill in the chemistry department, discovered this nitric oxide is something that we all have in our bodies, and it helps us regulate, it helps us to fight infection, actually. But there was a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1989 who had reported on the ability to produce nitric oxide. And so at UNC, they were researching this, and they found a way to take a nitric oxide gas and then turn it into a powder, and then they turned it into a gel and researched it for many years. And in January of 2024, so just 13 months ago, it was approved by the FDA. But the journey was long. And so this company was spun out of UNC in 2006. And so some of the patents were even running out and will be running out in 2026. But they were able to get some extensions so that I think they have now until 2032 because of different types of patents that they got after the fact. But anyway, they started out for several years pursuing their product in acne. And they ran 2 phase 3 trials. One it worked, and one it didn't work. But each trial had about 1,300 patients. So 1,300 patients is very costly. The company didn't have a lot of money. So the company then decided, well, with the money we have left, we have the ability to run 2 phase 3 trials in molluscum. And those results came back, and in 2020, right in the middle of COVID, or right before COVID, and they were inconclusive. And that meant they were both going in the right direction, but neither of them had statistical significance, which is what you look for the FDA. I'll try to make a long story short. We got additional funds from investors and ran another phase 3 trial. We were able to submit an NDA in January of 23. In the middle, the company had to go bankrupt because they didn't have any more money. So another company, Ligand, acquired this asset. SB206 is this berdazimer. And in January of last year, it was approved. So it's just another journey just to share with you what all happens, how long it takes. It takes a lot of money. Companies go, bankrupt trying to bring a new medicine to market, but, people lose faith. They quit investing for various and sundry reasons, but the product is approved, and it hasn't been launched. It hasn't been commercialized yet because, this company, either hasn't found the funds or whatever. I'm not there, so I don't know. But, frustrating for me that all that work and it's not on the market yet, but I'm told hopefully this year. So that's ZELSUVMI. I just thought I would share some of the top service providers. So the pharmaceutical companies in the clinical space, so remember those 3 chevrons on your lap, the middle one, which is that clinical, which is really the most costly to get a drug to market. That's where I've spent my years. The asterisk are next to 3, because those are all companies I've been personally involved with. So it's just kind of to show my own, in the industry, what I've been doing. But IQVIA being the largest, some of the other names that you might know, PPD was started in Wilmington, North Carolina. Icon is an Irish company, but has a big presence in the U.S. Parexel is a Massachusetts company, again, with offices here. Syneos is the combination of about 5 different companies came together, and their headquarters is in Research Triangle Park. Fortrea was a recent rename of a spinoff of a company, and their headquarters is here, Research Triangle Park. So you see, there's a lot of this is the home of the CROs, the clinical research organizations. The Research Triangle Park is the home, really, and started this business. And being a service provider, we conduct these clinical trials on behalf of those big pharmaceutical companies and little ones as well. Anyway, others, Charles River, MedPace, Worldwide Clinical Trials, they have a large office here. Premier Research, they have their headquarters here in the park. And then Elucent, where I am, and I'm in Cary, North Carolina. So really, a lot of people, Landis over here, worked in the CRO industry. So there are many people in this, in our community here who worked for one of these companies. How am I doing on time? Oh, I've run a little bit long. Okay, I'm going to finish up. Hot topics in the industry, maybe I'll just skip that one and just say this is the recent predictions. And so there were 2 recent articles that said, what's happening in the industry in 2025. So oncology, obesity, immunology, so autoimmune disease, neurology, so psychiatry or neurodegenerative diseases, are the areas likely to reap most of these R&D dollars. So that's the first 2 chevrons on your sheet. Also, gene therapy will also fuel some growth. But as you see, there's an increased focus on rare disease, and that's because we get more precise every day in terms of knowing what we need to treat. In the old days, it was just kind of throw it on the wall, and you would hear that this drug only really treats 50% of the people who take it because people didn't really understand how the drugs were metabolized, et cetera. So they're getting more precise, and which I think is quite helpful. But Research Triangle Park and Massachusetts are big hubs for innovation. And I guess if I have one plea, if you hear about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and looking at the pricing, the big companies are being questioned. But those big companies are who are going to buy the innovation from these smaller companies that get spun out of universities and the research that they do. And we need that innovation. All of us do. So I'm a big proponent of innovation and whatever we can do to spend money on that. Okay, Q&A, and I know I went a little over. So yes, somebody has a mic?
Yep, she's coming.
What do you think about generic drugs? What do you think about generic drugs?
Okay. Generic drugs are perfectly fine. I mean, I take them. What they have to do is they have to ensure that after a drug has lost its patent, that a new drug that, if you will, comes in its place, that it has to have the same bioequivalence. I think more so you have to figure out who the manufacturer is and make sure that it's in a place and, where it's being manufactured, and, those are some of the things you hear about. But I take generics because they really are the same drug. After it comes off patent, anybody can manufacture it. And so, yeah.
Last week, twice on CNN, I heard Dr. Sanjay Gupta speak about, I think it's Journax, Journa.
Yeah, I think it's a Novartis drug.
It's all right. It is a non-opioid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The non-opioid.
Yes.
opioid.
And he
Yep.
stated there has not been a new non-opioid since Celebrex in 1998.
Yes.
I took Celebrex for 20 years, and it's a marvelous drug. And then Dr. Ed discovered I had a hemoglobin of 4. So I was in the hospital 5 days finding out what was the problem. The problem was I had to come off Celebrex.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
would
had to
like
come off Celebrex. I mean, that's the thing. Not everything works for everybody. I had joint pains and I took it was back pain. My knees killed me. So I had to go off of Celebrex. So I think everything is for a purpose and we're all made differently. So not everything works for everybody.
What do you know about this drug and when it will come on the market?
Yeah, I know what I've read as well. Because of the opioid addiction, they've been looking for a non-addictive treatment for pain. And I have read as well. I think it'll come out pretty quickly because there's a huge need and there'll be, lobbying efforts, et cetera, to get it out quickly. It's interesting. I'll go back really quickly and say when metformin, when it was at the FDA waiting on approval, there's a senator's son who had been in the clinical trial. And when the clinical trial ended, he had to come off of it. And the senator lobbied heavily for us to give this drug. Well, we couldn't give it to just one. So what we ended up doing was running another trial, one of those post-marketing trials, so that we, could make it accessible to certain people. But anyway, I think there'll be a lot of pressure to get that on the market quickly. Yes.
Ma'am, one of the biggest players in the pharmaceutical was Bayer with the aspirin and all that.
Yes.
And I didn't see anywhere they're mentioned in the whole list of players. What happened to them?
Well, so he's asking about Bayer, and it's a German company, and they are the makers of aspirin. They don't make much money on it because it's genericized, right? And they got a new CEO this year because they have not prioritized their portfolio of candidates, those targets that I talked about, before you can. And so you have to select well to get one to the market. And so they've had some bad luck, but they're reorganizing and try to have better luck. But yeah, they're not in the top 10 anymore, but they're in the top 20.
Can you go back 2 screens?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Whoop.
One more. No, one more. The one that shows the 3 phases. Yes, that one. Does the FDA do most of the gray box?
So the FDA doesn't do any of these. These are all run by a pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
And then service providers like the companies I've worked for, CROs, clinical research organizations, we conduct the studies and we will go out and find physicians either around the US or around the world. My company, I have employees in 35 countries. And the reason for that is because we do a lot of rare disease and we need to find those patients. But the FDA doesn't, those 2 stars are when I go to the FDA with a submission. I go to them to review.
So my daughter works for the FDA.
Okay.
And it is not a happy place to be the last 2 weeks. They are
No.
being threatened. They have had forced resignations, and their best people are leaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where would you take 10%
Oh,
and subtract
okay.
it from that?
Where did you get your volunteers from?
So the question was, where do we get our volunteers from? We advertise. And some of them, like for molluscum, there are internet groups that are mothers of molluscum patients. And we'll go there and we'll say, we're starting a trial. So you find where there are groups of people, talking about, or you go to the physicians and we say, do you have any patients? And we will find, I know they're ready for me to finish. So, we find them advertising. You'll hear it on the radio. People will advertise on the radio, and sometimes in the past, not so much now, even on television, but it's very costly to advertise for patients there. Yeah, okay, I think I'm done.
Thank you for being here again, and thank Paula. And now we will draw for the prizes, and I do want you to know that Vidya Iyer from downstairs at the bank is the one that provides the gifts for us for these drawings. So if you see her and run into her, give her a thanks.
Okay, I got one red and one blue.
All right, this is a blue one. Hold on.
Let me get it.
1480282. Right there, Maydale. Got a red one?
Yep.
All right, this is a red one. 026654. Oh, good, Albert. That's great. And the next program will be, this is February, March. That's the business program. And this is where you are to send, or were supposed to send your questions in to Susan Walton, and they will be answered. And the business meeting is a very important meeting for our Residents Association. Thank you for being here very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you also, Paula. The next meeting, as she's indicated, will be on Monday, March the 10th at 3 o'clock. I do want to say to anybody who was planning on going to the Civil War Roundtable tonight, it will not be held because it has been canceled. The meeting is now adjourned. Paula's going to stay around a little bit and answer some other questions which you might have.